WXLQ in Bristol, Vermont, and WXLE in Indian Lake. Good morning. This is Northern Light for Wednesday, August 16th. I'm Monica Sandreski. Todd is away for a couple weeks. A longtime forest ranger who served in the North Country died by suicide last week.
Dave was just a super quiet, calm guy. Yeah, he was a really good field ranger.
That's renewed a focus on forest rangers' mental health. Emily Russell has more just ahead. Also, a new dog shelter has been operating in Canton since March. The problem is the shelter is operating in violation of the town zoning code, and neighbors have been complaining about the noise.
They're concerned about the welfare of the animals. They're concerned about the noise. They're concerned about the waste disposal. We've been hearing about all of those concerns for months.
And the band performing in Lake George tonight combines the improvisation of jazz with Ugandan folk music. We'll chat with the group Zakina coming up. All of that and more is just ahead on Northern Light. Stick with us. Support for Northern Light comes from Mountain Orthotic and Prosthetic Services, a full-service practice committed to providing care for patients of all ages with offices in Lake Placid, Plattsburgh, and Malone. Details and referrals at mountainonp.com. And by St. Lawrence Health, whose affiliation with Rochester Regional Health means more patient access to specialty care, stlawrencehealthsystem.org. This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski. We are starting the show with a story about suicide. It's about 3 minutes long, and we can rendezvous at 8:06. One of the top New York State forest rangers died by suicide last week. David Cornell was 52 years old. He was serving as an assistant director of the statewide force in Albany. Cornell's death comes a little over a year after another top forest ranger died by suicide. Emily Russell reports.
David Cornell began his career as a forest ranger back in 2000. He graduated from the academy with about a dozen other rangers, including Rob Perjacolo, who now works in the Adirondacks.
Dave was just a super quiet, calm guy. Yeah, he was a really good field ranger.
For most of his career, Cornell worked in the DEC's Region 6. That region includes St. Lawrence, Jefferson, Lewis, Oneida, and Herkimer counties. Before he became a ranger, he was an airplane mechanic in the Marines. He used that skill to serve as a helicopter hoist operator while he was a ranger. Cornell was awarded a Liberty Medal in 2018 by the state for helping save a motorcycle crash victim. He died by suicide last Friday. Ranger Rob Perjacolo said it took him by complete surprise.
I immediately was shocked by that news, especially for somebody who always seemed to be very calm and collected. And then the next thought that came to my mind was, who's next? Who is out there that needs help and isn't asking for it?
Cornell's suicide comes a little over a year after another top-ranking ranger died by suicide. Captain Chris Costas had been a forest ranger for 23 years, working in the Adirondacks. At the time, Costas's suicide sparked a renewed focus on mental health for rangers. Perjacolo says the job is stressful. It can often involve the mental health struggles of other people.
People committing suicide on state lands and overdosing and mental health folks that are out there. And and then, all the just accidental deaths and rescues that we do in the mountains. All that sort of accumulates.
Rangers do have access to mental health support. Projaclo says he takes advantage of counseling on and off. The most recent Ranger Academy had an embedded mental health team for the first time. Projaclo says their work does involve some really happy and even euphoric moments when there's a successful search or rescue. Those moments can help balance out the tougher times.
You just hope that at any given time you have enough good rescues and searches and firefighting and law enforcement stuff that makes you feel good about what you're doing. But there are definitely dark times for a while.
In a statement on Tuesday, the DEC said it's making emotional support resources available to all employees after Cornell's suicide. According to his obituary, Cornell is survived by his wife, 2 sons, and his parents. Emily Russell, North Country Public Radio.
If you or anyone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts, you can call the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. New York Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie is on a statewide tour rallying support to urge the federal government to intervene in the state's migrant crisis. That comes as Governor Kathy Hochul continues to ask the Biden administration for help. Some asylum seekers have been bused to hotels upstate. Speaker Heastie says the state cannot manage the influx of tens of thousands of asylum seekers all on its own.
State writes little checks, federal government can write big checks. We really need the federal government to intervene.
Governor Hochul says she's been asking fellow Democrat President Joe Biden and top White House aides daily to change some rules, including shortening a 6-month waiting period before the migrants can seek employment and helping with converting federal properties to shelter the asylum seekers. But so far, the federal government has not responded. Speaker Heastie says he doesn't blame Biden for the impasse. He says Republicans who control the House of Representatives wouldn't agree to the proposals.
Appropriations of money has to go through a Republican House, which I'm not sure they would want to be helpful because it's a good political issue for them. So I understand the White House is raising up concerns, but, at some point we can't just keep pointing fingers at each other. We all just have to figure this out.
But Heastie says ultimately he thinks it is the federal government that should be responsible for managing the migrant crisis. Heastie also talked about the state's fledgling legal cannabis industry on his stop in Schenectady County yesterday. He says he does not anticipate holding a special session to revive the industry after it's been stalled due to a court injunction. Karen DeWitt reports from Albany.
A judge temporarily halted the opening of any new cannabis retail stores and the granting of new licenses after 4 veterans with disabilities sued. They say that under the provisions of the original 2021 law legalizing the use of adult recreational marijuana, they should be among the groups given priority status to obtain the licenses. Under regulations set out by the State Office of Cannabis Management, the first batch of applicants had to have been convicted of a cannabis-related offense, and they also had to have operated a business successfully for at least 2 years. The industry group Cannabis Association of New York says the injunction threatens thousands of jobs, businesses, and the entire fledgling cannabis industry. They're asking Governor Kathy Hochul to convene a special session of the legislature to codify the regulations into statute so they are less vulnerable to legal challenges. But Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie says now is not the time to change the rules.
I think it's always difficult when there's a pending court case to ask the legislature to fix something. You don't know what the resulting decision will be by the courts.
Heastie, speaking in Schenectady County, says he strongly backs the decision to give people affected by the years-long prohibition of marijuana priority to apply for retail licenses.
The whole essence behind the way that this legislation was written was really to try to help those communities that were over-policed, over-incarcerated. Wasn't trying to exclude other people. Was really trying to right some of the wrongs that had happened over the years when communities were really devastated by the incarceration around cannabis.
A spokesman for Governor Hochul did not address the request for a special session, but did say in a statement that New York is establishing the most equitable adult-use cannabis market in the nation, and that the governor will continue her efforts to expand and improve the market. The restraining order is in place until August 25th, when lawyers for the veterans and for New York State will appear back in State Supreme Court in Kingston. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. It's about 10 after 8. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up, we'll meet the Ugandan Jazz Fusion Band playing in Lake George tonight. They even make their own instruments. A conversation right here on Northern Light, which is supported by Blue Seed Studios Saranac Lake, promoting community involvement in the arts on the web at bluseedstudios.org. And by North Country Children's Museum Potsdam with hands-on and minds-on exhibits and programs for children 12 and under and their families, open Wednesday to Sunday 10 to 5, northcountrychildrensmuseum.org. Music now by Joe Phillips out of Warrensburg. He's part of our Underscore project, which features music from musicians throughout the region on our news programs like Northern Light and Morning Edition and All Things Considered. These sort of 2-minute instrumental times when you hear me or Shelley Pike or Todd or Doyle come in, those are called music beds, and these feature the music of musicians throughout our region. If you're a musician that's would like to be a part of this, send us an email to radio@ncpr.org. Super cool project that Doyle Dean headed up, and it's been a real pleasure. More from Joe Phillips. A new dog shelter has been operating in St. Lawrence County since March. A man from Long Island rescues dogs all over the world and is bringing them to a property outside Canton. The problem is the shelter is operating against local zoning codes, and neighbors are complaining about the noise. Lucy Grindon reports on an issue that's becoming increasingly contentious for the town board.
Jeff Berry is the head of No Dogs Left Behind. The nonprofit opened its first dog shelter in the U.S. in March, right on State Route 68 in Canton. Barry's dogs run ahead of him as he shows me around the property.
Come on, guys, let's go. Come on, Lalai.
Barry says he's rescued dogs from dangerous situations around the world, in places like Ukraine, Afghanistan, and China. Sometimes dozens of dogs all at once.
I have a passion for dogs. I love dogs.
One of his dogs keeps circling back to his side like a boomerang. Barry said he picked him up in Beijing.
The traffickers were chasing him with nets, and I opened up my door, and he jumped in my car. He became my sidekick. He's a very smart dog, and a very loyal dog. He never takes his eyes off of me.
What is this guy's name again?
Prince. Wanzi.
Apart from Barry's own little pack of 6 dogs, plus 2 fosters, who live with him, there are about 40 dogs currently at the shelter. There were about twice that many a couple months ago, but some have been adopted or have gone to foster homes. Barry says he intends to keep about 120 dogs at the shelter at a time, on average. And he says Canton is the perfect location.
I love having everything in proximity. The airport here, Ogdensburg Airport here, it's an international airport. It's 29 minutes away. I love being 7 minutes from the town, and this area being zoned rural, that I could do what I want to do.
The problem is he can't just do what he wants to do, at least not according to Canton Town zoning code, which doesn't currently allow for dog shelters. Right now, only dog kennels are allowed. But the town code is supposed to be updated soon, and the draft of the new version does include a provision for shelters. Michael McQuaid is the town code enforcement officer.
If our new code was adopted, it's an allowed use. Unfortunately, it wasn't adopted.
In the meantime, the shelter has been operating since March in violation of code. And over the past few months, multiple neighbors have been complaining about the noise. Margaret Mauk lives about half a mile away from the shelter. She spoke at last week's Canton Town Board meeting.
Today makes 161 days in violation of the town zoning code, figured from March 1st.
Mauk submitted a petition at the meeting with more than 100 signatures on it, asking the board to consider issues like noise, environmental impact, and animal welfare. The St. Lawrence County Planning Board raised some of the same concerns back in June, when they officially turned down No Dogs Left Behind's application for a special use permit. The board cited concerns about the potential environmental impact of dog waste and urine and said an environmental assessment should be made. Leslie Clark also lives near the shelter, less than a quarter mile away. She's filed more noise complaints than any other neighbor.
It's ear-piercing. It's like my home has been invaded. That's how I feel. It's like this juggernaut came down from the sky, and it just really it's not been the same since.
Town Planning Board Chair Ian McKellar says this issue has been causing a lot of turmoil. He says people brought it up at the most recent Town Planning Board meeting.
There was a lot of comments from the public expressing concerns about No Dogs Left Behind. They're concerned about the welfare of the animals. They're concerned about the noise. They're concerned about the waste disposal. We've been hearing about all of those concerns for months.
Town Supervisor Marianne Ashley declined to comment on the situation at the town board meeting last Wednesday night. The shelter's buildings have been used as a dog kennel for decades, called Maple Ridge Kennels. No Dogs Left Behind is leasing the space from the owners, Stiles and Deb Bridges. Deb Bridges said she didn't think there'd be a problem.
Looking at the new zoning laws, with kennel and shelter being in there, I just never thought it would be an issue.
Bridges says what some of the neighbors want is unrealistic.
I mean, what's the standard? Is the standard absolute silence? That's unfair.
When I visited the shelter, it was raining hard, so all the dogs were inside. From outside in the rain, you could barely hear them. Inside, they made a lot of noise when I walked down an aisle between two rows of cages. Barry says the dogs should be expected to bark when there's a disturbance. Last week, Barry pleaded guilty to one count of causing a nuisance by allowing loud and persistent barking. He paid a $50 fine. But that won't necessarily affect what the town board does next. The town could make an exception to its current code. Or if the town wanted to force the No Dogs Left Behind shelter to close, it would have to take the issue to court. Lucy Grindon, North Country Public Radio.
The State Attorney General's office is investigating the death of a St. Lawrence County man after he was shot and killed by police last week. Police had been looking for Canton resident Sean Sheridan since mid-July when he skipped a hearing after he had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for shooting his fiancée last summer. On August 10th, a state trooper and canine dog partner were looking for him near the town of Russell. Officials allege Sheridan shot at the trooper and canine, and the trooper returned fire, killing Sheridan. He was pronounced dead at the scene, where police say they recovered 2 guns and a bandolier. New York state law requires the Attorney General's office to look into incidents where a police officer may have caused the death of a person. If so, the office will perform a full investigation. A Paul Smith College professor has been named the first Headwaters coordinator for the Racket River watershed. The Adirondack Council and Northern Forest Canoe Trail say Rebecca Sutter will help connect stakeholders in the region, like local governments, environmental groups, and lake associations, in order to address the watershed's health. Sutter teaches in the Environment and Society Department and will continue to teach. She'll be in the Headwaters coordinator position part-time. The new partnership between the two groups is called the Headwaters Campaign, with a main goal of developing a watershed management plan for the Racket River's headwaters. The Racket starts in Racket Lake in the central Adirondacks and runs through Long Lake, Tupper Lake, and north through St. Lawrence County and empties into the St. Lawrence River in Akwesasne. An open seat on Ogdensburg City Council will remain vacant as city councilors still cannot come to a consensus on who to appoint. North Country Now reports the city's charter mandates the council choose an appointee from a committee that selects candidates. The council voted 20 times but failed to choose between Robert Eady and Michael Tooley. Even after Eady asked his name be removed as a candidate after the vote, the council still has not reached a majority after the mayor and deputy mayor abstained from voting. The seat is still vacant after former councilor Nicole Kennedy resigned in June when her family moved downstate. In a letter, Tooley says he's qualified for the position based on his previous work with the city government. Tooley is also asking residents to support him as a mayoral candidate in the upcoming election. You can keep up with news from the newsroom at NCPR throughout the day at our website, ncpr.org, or follow the station on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Monica Sandreski. It's about 20 after 8. Coming up in just a minute, Ugandan storytelling and music tonight in Lake George. Then after that, stick around for Bird Note, rethinking the role of vacant lots in Chicago's west and south side. That's just ahead at 8:42. First, we got to take a look at the weather. It's 65 degrees in Alexandria Bay, 59 degrees in Saranac, and 65 in Bolton Landing. Scattered showers in the forecast today till about lunchtime with rainfall amounts less than a third of an inch throughout the region. Temperatures are expected to rise to the lower 70s through the early afternoon. Partly cloudy skies overnight, maybe with some scattered showers, lows in the 60s, more like upper 50s in the high peaks area. Then tomorrow, some isolated storms are possible in the region with highs warmer near 80 degrees. Right now, it is 8:22. I want to introduce you to the guys playing in Lake George tonight. Gideon Ampier and Mike Cardozo are founders of the group Zakina. It's a fusion band combining jazz and improvisation with traditional Ugandan music. Gideon was part of a Ugandan folk group in the U.S. called Echo Uganda, but it got hard to keep up because they needed 8 musicians. So he started considering Western music. That's when he met Mike.
The concept behind Zakina is how Gideon plays all these traditional instruments from East Africa, the adungu, the kalimba, and the nanga. And there's 3 of us behind Gideon that are sort of Western musicians growing up in the U.S. our whole life. So we play like a guitar, bass, and drums, kind of something a lot more familiar to the audiences here in the U.S. So it's kind of like we've got this very accessible thing that is familiar to create a platform for Gideon to play these East African instruments and kind of bring these East African songs and kind of storytelling tradition, but put it inside like this rock, jazz, dance beat surrounding.
Some of the instruments we use in Zakina, we have an adungu, which is an arched harp. Normally people describe it as a spoon in a cup kind of harp. It has 9 strings. There's variations depending on which region of East Africa you're coming from. Then there is also a zither, Z-I-T-H-E-R. This is a very old instrument. Not many play this instrument as it's normally reserved for older people with wisdom who can tell stories, recite poems, legends. So it's mainly a storytelling instrument. It's a 1-string zither. We call it a nanga in my language. And so I wanted to, introduce this instrument to a wider audience.
Gideon's grandfather was a real musical guy, and he always wanted to be like him. His grandfather was always humming and would share poetic epics and play music for them at night.
I grew up in a very extended family. You get to learn a lot about the culture, the traditions, the wedding ceremonies. All these things you hear as a child started making sense to me once I realized, all the stories, all the music is actually part and parcel of the community. You're hearing people's stories, you're hearing people's histories. So Ntwara is a traditional folk tune. The group where the song is coming from, they are pastorists, so they keep cattle. So the song is about praising the cows, the farmers, the people, the kids who wake up so early to go fetch the milk early in the morning, cook it, make it for breakfast, take care of the cows, they take care of you. And then the rhythm has some elements that are attributed to the dynasty that used to rule the region. So like when you hear the rhythm, this piece of song comes from this tradition or this group of people, right? That's the other component. When you listen to our music, if you're familiar with some of the rhythms, you can identify this is coming from Western Uganda, this is coming from Northern Uganda. If you hear Tuyimbe, la 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 la, la la la. Now we are in Central Uganda among the people called Baganda, who are ruled by a king, and this is the rhythm used to be played in the king's palace, right? So there are those elements that you pick up. You get more familiar with some of the tunes we are playing. I make my own instruments. When I got to the U.S., since I was always a musician, I wanted to continue playing, but I couldn't get the instrument shipped. Or if you try to buy an instrument, ship it via FedEx, hundreds of dollars. So the easiest way is to figure out how to make them yourself. So I started by making xylophones because those were very easy, just wood. And then I started learning how to use modern tools that you can find in Home Depot. And then slowly by slowly, I started crafting my own instruments I play.
Were there any that you were finding sort of difficult or really scratch your head about, like, how am I going to get this to come together?
Yes, I have spoken to many people who are like violin makers, guitar makers. I want to figure out how to modify my adungu, the way the neck is like an arch, right? And I can't figure out how to get the neck of the adungu into the sound box, which is made of a cow skin and the wood, right? For them to be able to put a lot of tension that the strings are pulling because it's an angle. So I haven't been able to figure that part out. I'm trying to think maybe if I could figure out how to insert a metal rod in the neck and then attach it to the soundboard. Maybe that would help. So I'm still experimenting. And honestly, I've relied on friends who they know how to use a table saw. Can you show me how to use a table saw? Right? So that's been really helpful. That within the community, then the community helps you to actually learn how to use these tools that I never used before.
Playing with Gideon, it's like this amazing adventure. Every time we're feeling a different energy and improvising. And we, like Gideon said, we do a lot of like improvised instrumental conversations back and forth. So in maybe what some people think of in like classic United States music, rock music, something like that, like people play solos on their instruments. In our concerts, we do a lot of these things where we like kind of play a solo together.